Dzień dobry Państwu. Witam bardzo serdecznie na kolejnej dyskusji tutaj w hali maszyn. Tematem tego panelu będzie idea wejścia Polski do strefy euro.
Entering the Eurozone, and the title is with a question mark. Before the panel, we have noticed that actually on the stage there are people who are for this idea, but maybe when the audience will have their say, you will express your challenge to us. Just a brief introduction. The partner of the panel is the Economic Freedom Foundation that delivers the eurodirection.pl. So visit this campaign. It's in the zone of NGOs in the EC1. So in this website you will find a lot of information on the history of euro, myths and facts, frequently asked questions and answers, and the results of some surveys we have delivered through internet. The surveys were conducted by an external company. So it's rather not about sentiment and support to the idea of Poland joining the Eurozone. And at the end, there are some explanations why there are no opponents to this idea. We think that we are of the opinion that in 2004 Poland has obliged to enter the Eurozone. So from this perspective, we think that the answer is clear. Poland should join Eurozone. We don't know when. We can discuss this, but we have to join the zone. So the panelists include Marek Belka, who is the member of the European Parliament and the former president of the National Bank of Poland. Professor Joanna Tyrowicz, who is an economist. When I was inviting Professor, she was a candidate to the Council of Financial Policy. Paweł Wojciechowski, who is an economist and the director at White Shield Company in London. And Andrzej Prendke, the head of the Młodzi Nowocześni group, which has just organized a campaign, the mission of young people. So the first question goes to Professor Marek Belka. Poland has obliged to join the Eurozone, and the fact that we are outside of the zone generates some costs. So if you could answer why Poland so far has not joined the zone and why this cost of not being in euro is high to Poland. It's a coincidence in 2008 when the Prime Minister Tusk announced that Poland is ready to join the Eurozone. 2 weeks later, or even a week later, the Lehman Brothers Bank collapsed, went bankrupt, and the global financial crisis started. And later on, in 2012, euro as the currency could be withdrawn. I witnessed the situation, how European companies were asking members of the board of the European Central Bank, they were asking whether there will be a collapse of this currency. And they were also asking how we going to calculate liabilities and assets of specific countries. When Mario Draghi heard of this, he went to London and he said, we will do whatever it takes, and believe me, it will be enough. And that was the peak moment of the banking in Europe, because the participants of the financial market believed, and they were right to do so, they believed that the European Central Bank has sufficiently strong instruments to save the Eurozone. So in such conditions, it was hard to hurry to join the Eurozone. When I was the president of the central bank, I expressed an opinion that yes, we need to join the Eurozone, but we do not have to hurry. Now, I have changed the opinion, so when someone asks me why I changed my mind so quickly, not quickly, now I've got the reasons. At the time, Poland's monetary policy was very good, and nowadays it's weak. That is why we should cooperate with the strong actors. When we're talking about the cost of being or not being in the Eurozone, there are benefits, and economists are able to compute them. But this doesn't have any special impact on the country's economy. Sweden doesn't have euro, and this country develops very well. This is an argument used by the opponents. But we have to be aware that nowadays, in today's world, in the world which is not only burdened by the war in Ukraine, political aspects of security are also important, and using the common euro currency would provide us political support. It would support the Eurozone and the EU politically, and it would increase our security. And the last thing I wanted to say, you have to be aware, and I'm an economist by saying this, euro from the very beginning was a political project, because euro is a mechanism of continuous deepening of the European integration. Euro forces Eurozone states to approximate, to deepen the interaction between the economic and financial institutions. If somebody is against euro by instinct, just like us as the central government, we cannot be surprised that they are against euro currency. Let's continue this theme. I have already mentioned this internet survey. I would encourage you to read through the survey results. It shows the benefits of being a member of the Eurozone, how it impacts security. It also covers the aspects of the war in Ukraine. I would like to continue the theme of the cost and the economic nature of either presence or absence in the Eurozone. So the same question goes to Joanna Tyrowicz. How much does it cost us to be outside of the zone? Thank you for the invitation. I will be speaking as the economist because I do not understand politics. Sweden is doing very well. It's true, Poland will cope outside of the Eurozone, but economists say that they won't manage so well. It's the same about Sweden. They are not doing so well. It's not only about the integration. The advantage is that if we look at the development of such countries as Poland, we can identify some differences. There are regions where the level of economic development is higher or lower. And if we were to alleviate these differences, which obstacles do we face? Geographic distance barrier, and that's it. Maybe the infrastructure is insufficient for individual movement, but in my opinion, it's all under the category of geography. When we are looking at the EU, and if we ask the question, which barriers are there for sharing welfare? Then we will discover that beyond the geography, we can't change geography, there is another barrier. If I am going to trade with a partner outside from the Eurozone, the distance is bigger, and we also do not know the currency exchange rate. Today it can be at this level, but tomorrow it can be different. So the currency exchange rate estimation takes a lot of energy since the 1980s, when we were estimating the home bias. So here we are looking at maintaining trade relations with the countries that are using similar currencies. So, for example, Canada or States. So the distance geographic distance was addressed. So, for example, if we have if our partners is 100 kilometers away from us, if you look at the connections between Canada and United States, these distances are much bigger. Of course, many things have changed. These are the results from the mid-1980s. Now these outcomes are smaller and smaller, but they still remain important. So we need to understand the difference between Poland and Sweden. Sweden is quite far away from any other Eurozone member states. It's located on the peninsula. The land border is not so long, and geography is of importance to Sweden. Poland has a very long land border with member states within Eurozone. So this barrier we are choosing, we are not members of the Eurozone. It's much more important in terms of geography. So the argument that not being in the Eurozone generates cost, it's an important and powerful argument, but at the same time it's hard to notice because people find it a bit difficult to understand that there are attractive partners, financial partners. In business terms, it's very important. So can we develop outside of the Eurozone? We can, but the speed of development is slower. The same question to Paweł Wojciechowski. He's also an economist. So I would like to ask you about the cost of being outside or in the zone, Eurozone. It's a good question why we still haven't joined the zone. There was a chance to become a member state to the zone. Some people say it's an advantage, others that it's disadvantage. There are some differences, but the geopolitical factors mentioned by Professor Belka are important. There were such opportunities in 2005, 2007, and in 2015 till 2017. This is when we met all the accession-related conditions, apart from the last one about accession to M2 mechanism, and such decisions were not made. I remember when the Minister of Finance Jacek Rostkowski said that we should wait for the Eurozone to manage its problems. Here we had the debts of Greece, so there were problems within the Eurozone. Then the rhetorics changed. It wasn't about the Eurozone that the mechanisms didn't work because Eurozone was fixed, the fiscal system and the procedure for imbalances was introduced as all ex-ante actions to signal some imbalances was implemented. And what happened? Now, then we had the government, so some 7 years ago, President Kaczynski said, first, we need to have German lifestyle. We have to reach the level of the German lifestyle. I remember this major debate of economists. What does Kaczynski mean? Is this true? Will we reach it? It was a mistake. It was a fake thesis by Kaczynski, which resulted from the fact that maybe he just doesn't have enough economic know-how. When we join Eurozone, we intensify investments, the public debt is cheaper. And due to this, economy develops. Now I am checking the member states that have joined the Eurozone, and I compared it to Poland. Because if we hear that the economy doesn't grow so quickly, let's check Latvia. In 2014, the GDP was 3.1 thousand euro in Poland. This equivalent was different. We earned 160 euro less than in Latvia. Later on, in Latvia, they were earning on average 10,500 and Poles 8.8. So the difference was 10 times bigger in Latvia. So euro didn't harm them. If we look at the prices of 3 states, Poland, Czech and Hungary, were at the same level that in Latvia. So the prices were growing at the same speed. Of course, there were some differences, especially when you start being a member to the Eurozone, but a cappuccino effect was 0.3%, but there is no such effects that the prices grow differently in the Eurozone. So the Eurozone, so if we want to have a higher gross income per capita, it's a good idea to join the Eurozone. Now the narration has changed. It's quite weird, even more weird. The president of the National Bank of Poland, Glapiński, he is against the euro entering the Eurozone, although it's not his decision because it's a political decision. We also hear that the EU will impose euro in Poland. So this is a festive ideology, patriotism festival. So it's not about economy, it's about politics. Thank you very much. I'm very happy that some myths have been already referred to in our discussion. So the first question to Andrzej Prendke, who has organized the Euro Mission campaign. So some street events were organized. So if you could tell us about the experience from this project and what people in different cities and towns think about it. What were they saying when you were asking them about their fears? Which myths were repeated? Thank you for invitation to this panel. It's a major event. I am surrounded by authorities. I'm quite moved. Answering your question and telling you about the Euro Mission campaign, in general, it's worth having a common currency, because if we define the money as a mean of exchange, the more popular it is, the better it performs its function. I can travel more or less freely, so some things I take for granted, and the common currency is quite natural. We live in the world of globalization, whether we like it or not. I am not an economist, but I must say that having euro is comfortable, it's convenient. I work for the association which associates young people. We are not economists, but we look at euro as a very convenient mean. So when we were thinking of our Euro Mission campaign, we didn't have major doubts whether we should organize it or not. It was obvious, it was natural for us to organize this campaign. So we make some exhibitions, traveling to different places, and we try to get rid of the myths. Of course, we've got some know-how thanks to such partners as the Economic Freedom Foundation. And I must say that this was a very interesting experience to us. Purposefully, we have focused on smaller towns. If you go with a street campaign to such towns, it's not so obvious to the residents who are not quite used to some happenings. It's quite common to residents of big cities. So to them, to the small communities, it was quite an event. So we witnessed very different reactions. Quite many were negative, and I was quite surprised. We know that economic arguments are not always very convincing, and we were often operating in the world of emotions. We are in the European Union, and many people use euro currency, and young people, modern people, just like our association, can ask ourselves the questions why we are not among the millions who use euro. So it was a challenge. So sometimes we heard the arguments of people who were saying that they are against being a member state in the EU. So we were explaining how attractive Poland is, how attractive economically Poland decided to be after the year 2004. And we were saying that we could double the benefits of our credibility if Poland joins the Eurozone. I was also quite surprising. Our exhibition consists of colorful panels, posters, and President Glapiński is in one of the posters. In Poland, not many people associate such central people, knows who these people are. So, for example, Prime Minister, President Kaczyński are well recognized, but President Glapiński was causing some quite a lot of negative emotions, and I found it quite uneasy.
Right, before we go to the next round of questions, now we can ask the audience, who of you is for Poland joining the EU zone? Any votes against? I can see two people at the back. Perhaps you will have some questions. Anybody not having an opinion? All right. Thank you very much for your opinions. I would like to come back to Marek Belka and ask a combination of two questions. As the head of the National Bank of Poland, you observed changes in the Eurozone. It used to be different than it is now, but when it comes to the quality of the shared currency institutional value, do you think it should evolve in order to become better? And the second question is about the Polish institution. To what extent the central bank should be active in the process if another government, a new government, is involved in Poland's entering the Eurozone? Is it possible in case of resistance from the central bank? The Eurozone, at the beginning of the previous decade, experienced a severe crisis. Greece, Portugal, Spain, and as Damocles sword, the situation of Italy. Therefore, as a result of the crisis, we also say that the European Union and Eurozone has to evolve through crisis. If there is no crisis, it's boring and nothing's happening. If there is no crisis, there is no progress. Well, we had plenty of crises, so the institutional structure of the common European currency has changed. We've got a banking union, common supervision, common system of insurance, shared capital market, but the most importantly, the European Union slowly evolves towards a fiscal union. The United States is also a currency union, but there is the central budget, which can be used as a life jacket for poor elements of the structure. The EU needs the same. As a result of the Greek crisis, European stability mechanism has been developed. It is a huge pot of money which can be released in case of economic shocks. But quite recently, as a result of the pandemic, but it also fitted the roots and the foundations of euro, the European Union decided to build a next generation EU, which is a new financial instrument, 750 billion euro, which this time is not brought as installments by the member states, but are borrowed in the capital markets. It's a revolution. It means that the European Union as a whole becomes a budgetary or fiscal entity. There are European assets that the financial market is crazy about because they are considered the best, safest, and most stable assets. Every bank and every financial institution needs such assets. The next step will involve building EU's own resources, namely pan-European taxes. Don't worry, they are not going to be taxes that will become the burden for the EU citizens. The first example is something that is not called a tax, but this is carbon footprint tax. If you want to export goods and services to the largest market globally, but if your goods, Chinese, American, or Polish ones, are characterized by high carbon footprint, then you have to pay. This is a kind of tax which goes to the European pot, and it will help repay the 750 billion euro debt. There are a number of similar proposals which raise lots of emotions, also because when it comes to taxes, there is uniform liberum veto in Europe. You know how it ended up in Poland, and it has to end in Europe as well. At least in some areas, the EU needs to shift to majority voting. That will be among the most important aspects of Euro functioning. Thank you. Together with Joanna Tyrowicz, we delivered presentations during the campus, and there were questions about some economic myths. So I would like you to refer to at least two of them, which are quite vital, and they are present in some comments. The first one is related to strictly economic aspect, and very often people don't know what it means. Meaning that the European Union is not the optimum currency area, and that's why Poland shouldn't join it. And the second one is related to inflation rate. Nowadays we've got high inflation rates in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. We shouldn't join the EU because it's going to be so high. Is price increase the key argument which we read in the comments on the internet? Could you please refer to the two myths related to economy? Thank you very much for these questions. They often emerge in debates. The theory of currency areas has been developed by the Nobel Prize winner. In the time when the Eurozone was created, the optimum currency area sounds good, but it was not when it was created. The very fact that these countries live together much longer than you do live, sir, optimized the economic cycles and production indicators. Discussing whether Eurozone is optimum makes equal sense to discussing whether Switzerland is an optimum currency value or whether the USA is. There are tensions, differences which occur in all currency areas, and that's why we are looking for fiscal mechanisms which facilitate the use and operation of capital so that the potential of the tensions to spread throughout the EU is limited. Although it was not the optimum currency area in 1990, a long time has passed and a lot has changed in this respect. I also wanted to say that by the very fact of being an EU member, our economic cycles became synchronized with the EU. Something that seemed a huge cost has lost its significance. We've got stronger economic links to Germany, France, Spain, Italy, regardless of the fact that they are not as high as they could be once we had shared currency. They are high enough to follow the same economic cycle as the Eurozone countries. That was the first myth. And the second one was related to inflation rates, that it's so high in the Baltic states, so we shouldn't join the EU zone, and generally that it means expensive prices. Well, I'm not sure whether it's convincing, especially in the tourist season. But let's put jokes aside. The Eurozone inflation rate is is lower than in Poland. The price increase in Poland is not uniformly spread throughout the country, and we don't ask why the prices do not go up so high in the Rzeszów region than in Gdańsk region. And the third one was about the increasing prices in the EU zone. As I said, the inflation rate in the EU zone is lower than in Poland. And can it happen that in 20 years' time we are in the Eurozone and the price increase is... I'm sorry, somebody has been disturbing the sound?
Tak, coś się dzieje.
It's the same in Poland. The Podkarpackie region can say that our policy is too restrictive from the point of view of the dynamics of prices in this region. I often quote the following example. People say the autonomy of the monetary policy needs to be adopted locally and not throughout the continent. First of all, it requires an assumption that the central bank will respond adequately. And secondly, being inside allows for observing how the European Central Bank responds. Being outside does not let it. There are pros and cons. Being outside the Eurozone deprives us of the power to decide what policy is followed. And it helps us decide on the monetary policy in the entire Europe. In 1991, when Estonia became an independent state, they adopted a currency board. First, the currency was linked to German marks, then to euro. It means no autonomous decisions were made in their central bank. When the interest rates were going up in the Eurozone, they were also rising in Estonia and vice versa. Now, they say they've got independent monetary policy. They didn't have it until 2009 when they joined the European zone. So hence the question what we want to refer to, whether it's the piece of 360,000 square kilometers between the Oder and Bug, or we perceive ourselves as the part of the strong developing Europe. I prefer the other one. Poland does not fulfill the criteria of entering the Eurozone, but this is not only technical fulfillment of the criteria, but more reforms in our economic policy. Entering the Eurozone will be closer to the northern institutions when it comes to quality of our financial institutions. Hence the question to Paweł Wojciechowski, priorities in the economic policy. If a window of opportunities is open, what should we do as the country in the economic policy in order to enter the Eurozone as a strong economy? The very fact that we consider access to the European zone, it would set our economic policies right, because we don't know what they are. We mentioned catching up with Germany. Mr. Glapiński said that in 8 years' time we'll catch up with France. All right, but we can't see it. We've been chasing them, but not successfully. In the Eurozone, as the previous speakers said, the entire concept of reaching the objective is set. It's like applying the framework of stability of the currency, stability of inflation rate, and public debt. They're all linked from the macroeconomic point of view, and there are also some components of institutions and extension, for instance, of the fiscal union. We are actually a member of the currency and economic union, although not everybody is aware of it. There is a component which is often mentioned. It's the component of sovereignty. When you mentioned that when you talk to young people and ask, are you for and against euro, it's something that they don't understand. We can be for and against. Young people who were raised in the culture where they can easily cross the border and that there is the currency which we might have. It's simply money. From the point of view of the priorities, they are sequenced in the macro scale. I'm not going to enumerate all reforms because the majority of them applying to Poland and high quality of public services apply to national policy, but it also affects competitiveness. Once we are healthy, we'll work longer. I don't want to talk about it, but we should pay attention that those who live in the Eurozone, once you ask them, this was Eurobarometer research from 2021, they said openly they are happy to have the shared currency. 70% of the Eurozone inhabitants are satisfied to have euro in their countries. Nobody asks us whether we want to be in the Eurozone or not. They ask about our attitude to European institutions. This is a kind of thinking that owing to sovereignty we could do better. That's fantastic, but let's imagine that the sovereignty on the European level is, or in the Eurozone, is exactly the same as sovereignty related to customs. We've got common trade policy. Perhaps we were more efficient if we could determine our import customs, but we are now a member of or a part of the larger body, and hence higher integration and security it entails. In this integration, we perceive some positive elements. It comes from the macro scales through to institutions up to what is of the highest interest for population. We are in the safety zone, especially when it comes to external hazards. If there are no economic arguments, the arguments of safety and security should be raised, and the relationship between countries which share like-mindedness. It means we support one another. There are components of solidarity, but also the components of co-reliance and co-security. Before I give the floor to the audience, because somebody would like to ask another question, and hence the question goes to Andrzej Prendke. We mentioned some myths, but which were most common in Poland, and in what groups did they occur? Do you know who the strongest opponents are, and what arguments they use that we shouldn't enter the Eurozone? Among the youngest respondents, it was often Europe for and against, because the economic argument was of pivotal importance. However, European integration is obvious for young people. They are familiar with euro, and sometimes they don't understand why they can't pay in euro. Other arguments which are against are that it's going to be more expensive here, but also about national identity. I don't buy it. We do remember how strong brands were the German marks and French francs. The fact that now they use euro does not undermine the national values and national identity of these states. Poles know the euro currency because they travel throughout Europe. We try to catch up with the West, but paradoxically, once we reach this objective, we'll talk about euro. But paradoxically, if we had euro, it would be much easier to catch up with the rest of Europe. But in order to accept euro, we need the political will. Before there is political will, there must be the social will. Politicians won't go against the social mood and social approach. After Marek's question, I have learned that there are quite many of us. We, as the association Young and Modern, decided to carry out this social and information campaign because it's obvious for us. We have to disseminate this knowledge, we have to talk about it, because it's going to trigger the political process leading us to the Eurozone. That's what we hope for. On the Kurs na Europę website, you can find a number of arguments to help you discuss with the opponents of the idea. There are not many of them here, but many of them outside this room. I'll give the floor to the audience in a moment. But first, a short question to Professor Belka about the thing that we were talking informally, but it also occurs in comments when we talk about euro. The Slovaks who go to supermarkets in Zakopane and Lithuanians who go to supermarkets in Slovakia, since euro is so good, why do they come to us? Because they are richer and everything in Poland is cheaper, hence they come here and they buy here. We need to be aware that a country like Slovakia, which entered the Eurozone after a very strong exchange rate of the Slovak krona, they were not afraid of its impact on the export, as it was mainly executed by foreign companies. The majority of Polish exporters are also importers, so the exchange rate is less important than we think. Slovakia entered the Eurozone having very strong national currency, and as if it was touched by the magic wand, they became richer. It was a dozen or so percent higher purchase power. They could buy cars which became 30% cheaper, and the same applies to our regional cheese in Zakopane. So let's not feel sorry for Slovakia, because they benefited a lot on entering the Eurozone.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the audience? We can have 2 or 3 questions. Maybe some of the opponents would like to ask a question. I think everybody is convinced that we should enter the Eurozone. I can see that the mic is approaching to a person who would like to contribute to our discussion. Jakub Dynmek, Przegląd magazine. I am one of the opponents. And I would like to ask the question to Professor Tyrowicz. Recently, you're very popular in the media. I hope I won't spoil it, because my question is about the logic of your argumentation, because your thesis is that accepting euro will protect us from high inflations in terms of the crisis we are just facing. So how would you comment the situation in the two countries that have been mentioned, Estonia or Slovakia? They have high inflation, even higher than in Poland, which shows a different thesis. From my information, on average, the inflation is lower. Actually, we can see that being a member to the Eurozone does not protect nations, states from inflation. So countries which pay a lot of money for energy, they have a higher inflation. It doesn't matter whether we are talking about Hungarian forint, Polish zloty or korona in Slovakia. So in other countries, the average value is better than in Poland. So does it mean that after we accept the same policies that have been accepted by the countries, the situation in Poland will be just as good as in these countries? Thank you very much for the information that I'm present in your homes. I think I have answered your question, but I'll be happy to repeat. We can meet in the same place next year, in a year's time, and you will see that the rate of the decrease in inflation will be better in these countries. Our inflation is higher. I'm very sorry about this. I do not want to compare inflation between Riga and Paris and Warsaw. When you enter the Eurozone, this is irreversible decision, just like introduction of Polish zloty was irreversible in 1922 when it was introduced. Thirdly, you are talking, how to put it, I don't know. When we are looking at the mechanism of transmission of costs of imported goods, and when we are looking at its impact to the prices of goods, it's not like in the combined vessels that if you pour water, the level will rise. If zloty is strengthening, when we looking at the ratio between dollar and euro, actually it is impacted on the prices of the energy carriers. So if we look how it is accepted in Poland and in many member states, in particular the countries that extend their integration in the Eurozone, as President Belka was saying. So when we look at the logics of development during the crisis, they are in a completely different place. So now we've got the crisis of the aggression of Russia, so the carriers of energy are much more expensive now. What has happened, and I think that the Eurozone countries will be more resilient. And we, Poland, should also learn a lesson, and our economy should be more resilient. So if we had more shocks, then we can see that the EU is in a completely different place. Due to investing in green transmission, thanks to the National Reconstruction Plan, we can use renewable sources of energy. We can produce green energy in countries where there is a lot of sun and wind. There are lots of mechanisms which deepen the European integration, and this allows these countries to become more resilient to such shocks. Professor Belka. If I could add anything, euro is not a panacea. You can have good economy and you can be outside the eurozone. You can have euro and you can have destabilized economy, weak economy. Let's look at the present situation. Inflation in 3 countries, Baltic states, is very high. And it can be explained by the fact that they are specifically dependent on the gas imports of other energy materials. In the Netherlands too, somebody added. But the Netherlands, we are looking at 10 to 12%, and here it's 25%, so it's big difference. And Sweden and Finland are the countries which either use green energy or nuclear energy, and they are separate from the high rises of cost of energy. And in Poland, a strong factor is weak Polish zlotys, and it's due to the poor condition of the monetary policy and the institution of the Central Bank of Poland. The natural gas's price has gone up to 5 to 10%, not more, and the dollar has strengthened by 20% in comparison to zloty. So it means that the price for the natural gas in Poland is 30% higher here. This results from the situation that we are not in euro. And what would happen if from yesterday we introduce euro? Several things would occur. First of all, interest rates would reach 1.5%, not 6.5%. Young people are getting happy who are getting mortgages. There will be fears it will lead us to the speculation bubble, economic growth, and maybe even higher inflation. All economists were afraid of the situation if euro would be taken by the catching up countries, and it has never worked. This thesis has never come true. Good economic policy means that these small interest rates do not lead to inflation. And marginally speaking, now we have 130 billion euro of reserves. Do you know how much would we need if we were in the eurozone? 1/10 of this amount. And the rest? We would be able to spend this money on some good purposes. And Paweł Wojciechowski maybe would like to address this. I'm monitoring the audience. If there is another question, we will give you the mic. I only wanted to add, there are Baltic states that depend more on the energy from Russia. Ignalina, a nuclear power plant, has been disconnected. The Baltic states cover the population of 6.5 million people. It's 0.1% of the eurozone. So we are talking about minority. If we are looking at the forecasts of the European Commission for the next year, Poland will be the leader in inflation. Poland will be leader in terms of the interest rate. So credits will be very expensive in Poland. We still are number one. There are such countries such as the Netherlands, whose inflation is 2.1% of the percentage point than Poland. So the gas, it's much more expensive than other energy sources. There are countries where the inflation is much lower. So if we look at the eurozone, the inflation is around 10%. For Poland, it's 17.2%. So it's a difference. So we have to look at the overall eurozone, not just 2 or 3 countries, because I think next year these countries will have lower inflation than in Poland. I would clarify this. Professor Tyrowicz has suggested a bet. I hope it won't be it won't be the same as the bet accepted by Professor. You're talking about a bet. We cannot compare your statement to my intervention. You said that in a year's time we will see that the fall of inflation in those countries will be more visible than in Poland and the Netherlands. Subject, Professor. Well, you can look at the base inflation. I'm sorry I'm interfering. In Poland we have 10% and in the Eurozone it's 4%. But I think that the latest result in the Netherlands is not 10 or 12, it's 17.1. 2.1%. The inflation was lower by 2.1%. One more person would like to ask a question. We are coming to the end of this panel, so the question to Prime Minister Belka. We have heard strong arguments to enter the Eurozone, but all these arguments are strongly for. Is there any other side, any risks or costs caused by entering the Eurozone? And if yes, how to cope with them? When I was the head of the National Bank of Poland, I was defending the Polish zloty against euro using the following argument. Look at the year 2008. Great financial crisis. Export is falling by 20 or 30% day by day. And in Poland, Green Island, in Poland, the exporters have experienced great benefit due to the weakening of Polish zloty. So if the exporter was to export 20% fewer goods to Germany, but still earned more Polish zlotys, then the exporter did not have to lay people off or sell equipment. So Polish zloty saved us during the times of the great crisis. And then the zloty came back to the normal level. I was saying that I was lying because I didn't see or I didn't say that 2 years before, in 2006 and 2007, we were dealing with non-presidential strengthening of Polish zloty. Otherwise, well, you know, we were talking about the credits in francs, so it was huge inflow of capital with strengthened Polish zlotys. This was the time when we could buy $1 for 2 zlotys. So it was a bubble which exploded when the crisis started. Now, currently, we wouldn't have this defense. I admit, I was not telling the truth, and now I am telling the truth. Thank you very much for this final comment. We are approaching the end of the panel, so I would like to invite you to our post in the room next door. Please fill in a questionnaire because we are very much interested in your opinions on the euro. We are asking you about pros and cons, what should be on the 1 euro coin in Poland. So I would like to thank the panelists Marek Belka, Joanna Tyrowicz, Andrzej Prendke and Paweł Wojciechowski. Thank you for taking part in this panel.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it and how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Ihre Ausreise.
Atlas Network is, as the name suggests, a network, and it's global. We work all around the world. We're based in the U.S. We have about 159 partners in the United States right now, and the bulk of our partners are outside, nearly 500 in total.
Atlas Network, it connects people from all over the world, defending the idea of human dignity, defending human rights and personal liberties.
Atlas Network is focusing on, I think, the most important and moral cause in the entire world.
We partner with local innovators, local leaders who understand conditions on the ground in communities facing real challenges. We look at the people from the worldwide freedom movement that are passionate, are ready to make a difference, understand local conditions, and we invest in them.
At Atlas Network, we unleash individual ingenuity to enrich humanity.
The United States does not have a lock on the idea of freedom and liberty. Those ideas are beyond borders.
One of the main goals of Atlas Network is to eradicate poverty around the world, and we do that by investing millions of dollars in our partners' work every year.
Historically, wealthy nations around the world have tried to help low-income countries develop. The way we've been doing it traditionally has not really been working. So there's a movement to do development differently, and that means we need to step back as outsiders and rethink the role that we're playing in helping people in low-income countries achieve their dreams.
We want to make the world a better place. We want to make the world a freer world.
All of us want to leave a legacy and be part of something big to make a better world. This is exactly the work of Atlas Network.
With our growing number of hundreds of successful partners, we're stronger than ever.
Changing the world
Changing the world
Changing the world
starts together
with us.